I didn't think much of her the first time she waved from across the driveway. Just another neighbor with too many plants on her porch and a mug always in hand. But the night she invited me in, something shifted. Not in a dramatic way, not with violins or lightning. Just a quiet click inside me, like a door unlocking somewhere I didn't know existed. It was late autumn, the kind that smelled of rain and exhaust. I'd been fixing up my old car in the shared garage behind the building, my hands black with grease, when her voice drifted from the stairwell. "You're going to freeze out here," she said. I turned, and there she was, mid-40s maybe, hair tied up, but undone in a way that didn't seem accidental. She wore a loose gray sweater and carried herself like someone who had long ago made peace with solitude. When I mumbled something about being fine, she tilted her head, not smiling exactly, but studying me. "You look like you haven't eaten," she said, and before I could answer, she added, "Come inside." I made soup. It should have felt strange. It did, a little, but her tone wasn't flirty or motherly. Just matter of fact, as if inviting someone in was the simplest thing in the world. Inside her apartment, the air was warmer, scented faintly with rosemary and the kind of quiet music people only play when they don't expect company. Her living room looked lived in, but intentional. Stacks of books, framed black and white photos, a record player humming softly. She moved easily around it, like the space answered to her rhythm. I noticed the small scar along her wrist when she ladled the soup, and how her hands trembled slightly when she passed me the bowl. We didn't talk much. She asked about my work at the garage. I told her I'd been learning, that my dad used to fix cars, but I wasn't sure if I'd ever be as good. She nodded, as if she understood more than I said. Then silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy, like both of us were aware of it and too careful to break it. At one point, her gaze caught mine over the rim of her glass. It wasn't long, maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like being seen through. I looked away first, pretending to focus on the cracked pane of her table, but she didn't look away right after. I could feel her still looking, and the air seemed to hum with something I couldn't name. "Thank you," I said finally, just to fill the space. "For what?" "For inviting me in." She shrugged. "It's only soup." But it wasn't. It was a gesture, small, almost invisible, that somehow lingered after I left. I remember the way her door closed softly behind me, how I stood in the hallway for a few seconds longer than I should have, listening to the faint clatter of her spoon against the bowl. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way her voice dropped when she said goodnight, how her eyes lingered before she turned away. I told myself it was nothing, just neighborly kindness, a fleeting moment of warmth on a cold evening. But I knew better. Something unspoken had passed between us. Not desire, not yet. Just a quiet recognition of loneliness, maybe, or timing, or something neither of us was ready to name. And ever since that night, I can't pass her door without remembering the way it felt to be inside. The dim light, the sound of her breathing in the stillness, and wondering, absurdly, if she remembers it too. The second time I saw her, she was standing by her front door, struggling with a box that looked heavier than she wanted to admit. I was on my way out, keys in hand, but something about the way she leaned her shoulder against the frame, trying to mask the effort with composure, made me stop. "Need help?" I asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just books." I should have known better than to order more. I smiled. I've made that mistake before. Her eyes flicked toward me, amused for half a heartbeat. "You don't strike me as the reading type." That should have stung, but it didn't. It was her way of keeping distance, teasing just enough to stay safe. I lifted the box from her arms before she could protest. It wasn't heavy, just awkward, and her scent lingered faintly, sandalwood and something floral I couldn't place. Inside, the place looked the same as before, but lived in differently. A sweater over a chair, an open notebook on the counter, a half-finished mug of coffee. She cleared a space on the table, murmuring, "You can just set it there," and brushed her hair from her face with the back of her wrist. Her hands caught my eye again. They weren't delicate the way some people imagine older women's hands should be. They were practical, marked by faint scars and thin silver rings. She noticed me noticing, and something flickered in her expression, not discomfort exactly, but awareness. "Thank you," she said softly, and for the first time, her voice lacked its usual steadiness. I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Anytime." A pause. The clock ticked. The record player was off this time, and without its hum, the silence felt louder. I realized she wasn't avoiding my eyes because she didn't want to talk. She was afraid of what might come out if she did. "You've been keeping busy," I said, nodding toward the stack of papers on her counter. She smiled faintly. "Work mostly. Keeps me from thinking too much." "About what?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, she looked toward the window, where the gray afternoon light softened the edges of her face. "You're too young to start collecting regrets," she said finally. It wasn't an answer, but it felt like one. I wanted to ask more, but her posture had changed, shoulders drawn in, a quiet retreat. So I said nothing. We just stood there, the air thick with something unspoken again. When I turned to leave, she followed me to the door. "Be careful with the stairs," she said, her tone light again, controlled. I nodded, but she reached out suddenly, just to brush a bit of dust from my sleeve, maybe, and froze halfway through. Her fingers hovered, then withdrew as if the touch itself was dangerous. "Thanks," I said quietly. She only nodded, eyes unreadable. I walked out into the hallway, but halfway down the stairs, I stopped. Through the open window, I could see her reflection in the glass, standing still, hand against the frame, as if she'd forgotten I could still see her. For a moment, it looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. And that silence, that almost, stayed with me longer than any word could have. It started raining before I could make it home. One of those steady, unhurried rains that soaks through your clothes before you even realize you're cold. I ducked under the awning outside her building, shaking water from my jacket, when I saw her light flicker through the curtains. I wasn't planning to stop, but then her door opened, just slightly, as if she'd been expecting me. "Come in before you drown out there," she said, smiling faintly. "You'll track mud, but I'll survive." Her place was dim again, the same warm, quiet glow that made time feel slower inside those walls. A candle burned on the table beside a half-empty glass of wine. A record played softly, something old and crackling with static. "You always manage to show up when it rains," she said, not accusing, not teasing, just observing. "Bad luck?" I muttered, running a hand through my damp hair. She tossed me a towel, then motioned toward the kettle. "Tea's still hot. Help yourself." I poured 2 cups anyway. She didn't stop me. When I sat across from her, I noticed the tiredness in her face, not from age, but from something deeper. The kind of fatigue that comes from holding everything together too long. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but I already knew she'd deflect it with a joke. Instead, I said, "You look like you've had a day." She laughed once, dry and short. "Don't we all?" Her phone buzzed on the table. A man's name flashed across the screen. I only caught the first letter before she flipped it face down. She didn't explain, and I didn't ask. The silence after that felt tight, like a string pulled between us. "I thought you said you don't collect regrets," I said quietly. Her eyes lifted. "I said you shouldn't. I didn't say I follow my own advice." For a moment, neither of us looked away. I could see the reflection of the candle in her pupils, could hear the uneven rhythm of her breath. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the glass in slow, deliberate beats. Then she broke the moment, stood abruptly, reached for the kettle. "You should stay until it slows down," she said, voice calm again, but her hand trembled as she refilled her cup. I stood too, taking the cup from her before she spilled it. My fingers brushed hers. Just that, a touch, but it felt like the whole room had tilted around it. She didn't move away immediately. Our hands stayed there, overlapping slightly, until her phone buzzed again. This time, she turned sharply, picked it up, and walked into the kitchen. I caught fragments of her voice, low, steady, almost too calm. When she came back, she didn't mention the call. She just sat down, facing away from me. The rain softened to a whisper outside. "You should probably go," she said finally. I wanted to. I didn't. Instead, I stood there, still holding the empty cup, her warmth faint on the porcelain. "Good night," I said. She didn't answer, only reached up to blow out the candle. For a split second, before the flame vanished, our eyes met again, close enough for me to see everything she wasn't saying. And then the room went dark. I hadn't seen her for a week after that night. The rain had passed, the air had turned crisp, and I'd convinced myself it was for the best. But then, late one evening, her knock came, soft, almost hesitant, against my door. I need a favor, she said, standing there in her coat, holding an envelope like it might burn through her hand. The printer's dying again. Her apartment was dim as always, light pooling around her desk. The printer wheezed with each page it refused to produce. I crouched beside it, tools spread out like a shield between us. You really should replace this, I said. She leaned on the counter, arms folded. You say that every time. Maybe you just like the attention. It was meant as a joke, but the air changed when I said it. She didn't laugh. She just looked at me, too long, too quiet, and said, maybe I do. I froze. Her voice wasn't playful this time. It was steady, but beneath it was something raw, like she'd said more than she meant to. I straightened slowly. You don't have to. I know. She cut in, then sighed. I know. The printer sputtered once and died completely. We both stared at it, pretending that was the problem. I don't understand what we're doing, she said suddenly. Her tone was light, but her hands twisted together. You keep showing up. I keep letting you in. She stopped herself. I waited. It's what? She looked at me then, really looked, not at my face, but through me, like she was searching for a version of herself she'd misplaced. It's unfair, she whispered. There it was, the line we'd both been circling. I didn't mean to make this complicated, I said quietly. Her eyes softened. You didn't. I did. You just walked into it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with every unsent message, every almost touch, every time one of us had turned away too late. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, and one of her plants knocked gently against the glass. The sound made the moment feel smaller, more fragile. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint shadow under her eyes, the tiny scar near her temple. Her scent, that mix of rosemary and something floral, made my thoughts blur. Do you ever think, she said softly, that timing ruins more than it saves? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because standing that close, all I could think about was how easy it would be to reach out, to close the distance, to finally break the silence that had been building between us since the first night she invited me in. But I didn't. Instead, I took a slow breath, stepped back, and said, the printer's done for. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened in the low light. So are we, maybe. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it wasn't something broken we were standing in front of. But before I could find the words, she turned away, her voice quiet but steady. Thank you for fixing it, she said. And just like that, the moment closed. But her words, that quiet confession dressed as gratitude, have never stopped echoing since. I didn't expect her to ask me to sit down that night. The apartment was quieter than usual, the curtains drawn against the streetlights, shadows pooling in the corners. She held a photograph in her hand, edges worn, the kind of photo you keep even when you shouldn't. I found this the other day, she said, her voice low. She didn't look at me, only traced the outline of the faces in the picture. I thought I'd lost it forever. I leaned in, trying to see, but my curiosity felt intrusive, so I pulled back slightly. It was a photo of her younger self, smiling at someone I didn't recognize, an arm draped over her shoulder. The way she looked at it made something in me tighten, a silent pulse of empathy I couldn't explain. That's someone important? I asked carefully. Her eyes flicked to mine for a moment, and I caught the faintest tremor in her lip. He was. A long time ago. She swallowed hard, then returned to the photo. I didn't handle it well. I think about him sometimes, about how I let it slip away. I wanted to say something, 1,000 things, but she held my gaze just long enough to stop me. Instead, I said softly, he looks like someone I've heard about. Someone you love. She nodded, and for the first time, I saw the weight in her shoulders, the fatigue in her eyes, the hidden gravity she carried every day. Yes, she whispered. I don't talk about it. Most people, they don't understand. I felt a strange surge of closeness, like a thread had been pulled between us. I wanted to reach out, to brush my thumb over her hand, but she didn't move closer, and I didn't either. We were careful with distance, as if proximity could break the fragile balance between confession and regret. You remind me of him sometimes, she said after a long pause, almost too quietly to hear. Not in how you look, in the way you notice things, the way you stay. My chest tightened. I didn't know if it was the comparison or the confession, but it sent a ripple through me I couldn't shake. She looked down at the photograph again, tracing a finger across a face I would never know. I was foolish, wasn't I? She murmured. I let timing, fear, everything get in the way. I wanted to tell her that she wasn't foolish, that life was messy, and sometimes people only find the right person by accident, or not at all. But the words lodged in my throat, heavy and brittle. Instead, I leaned back, letting her space remain hers, watching her in silence. Finally, she put the photo on the table, fingers lingering on it for a moment before she straightened. I should stop dwelling, she said, almost as if speaking to herself. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. It doesn't mean it never mattered. She gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, but her eyes stayed distant, fixed somewhere beyond the walls. And in that pause, in the quiet that stretched between us, I realized something. I had stepped into the shadow of her past, and nothing, not her caution, not my restraint, could erase it. When I finally stood to leave, she watched me at the doorway, hand lingering on the frame as if holding me back without words. And then she whispered, so softly I almost missed it, "Don't let me go, not yet." I didn't expect her to notice the small tremor in my hand. We were sitting at her table, late afternoon sunlight slanting through half-drawn blinds, each of us caught in our own quiet thoughts. I'd come to help her sort through some papers. Nothing dramatic, just mundane work. And yet, sitting across from her, it felt like the entire room was charged with unspoken words. She looked up from a stack of envelopes and met my gaze. "You've been around a lot lately," she said, her voice soft, careful. Not a question exactly, more of a statement that carried its own weight. "I've been around," I agreed. The words sounded clumsy, but the truth was simple. I didn't need to explain why. She understood anyway. There was a pause, a quiet that stretched comfortably, though it hummed with tension. I noticed how the sunlight caught her hair, how the corners of her eyes crinkled slightly as she leaned forward. Her hand rested on the table, fingers just brushing the papers, small, deliberate movements that spoke more than words could. I reached for a folder, and our hands brushed briefly. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. That tiny contact was enough to make my chest tighten, but also enough to make me feel like this, whatever this was, had been inevitable all along. "You're patient," she said finally, almost to herself. "I don't think I've met anyone patient like you before. Maybe it's because I know what I'm waiting for." I replied, my voice low, careful not to push, not to declare, only to acknowledge. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer. Instead, she shifted, leaning back and letting her hand rest lightly near mine. I let mine stay there, fingertips touching hers. The contact was minimal, but it was enough. We didn't need to speak. Words felt unnecessary, heavy, and perhaps even dangerous. What mattered was the space we shared, the way our presence aligned with each other's rhythm, the understanding that had grown over weeks of silences, shared glances, and small acts of kindness. I watched her breathe, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the quiet strength she carried despite the shadows in her past. And I realized that this closeness, this awareness, was the culmination of everything that had come before. Not fireworks, not dramatic gestures, just honesty, proximity, and acceptance. She leaned slightly, enough that our foreheads nearly touched, and I didn't move away. A faint smile tugged at her lips, mirrored by mine. We sat like that for a long moment, the world outside muted, irrelevant. When she finally pulled back just enough to meet my eyes fully, there was no need for words. The acknowledgement was mutual, earned over the quiet stretch of shared history, tension, and longing. I stood to leave eventually, but I didn't pull my hand away from hers. She didn't move hers either. We let the connection linger, simple, unspoken, and entirely ours. As I stepped into the hallway, I glanced back and saw her watching me, hand still hovering near mine, her expression calm and certain. And for the first time, I knew that whatever came next wouldn't be forced. It would unfold in its own time, quietly, inevitably, and completely. Looking back now, months later, it all feels like a series of small, deliberate gestures. The way she let me in, the way we shared silence as easily as conversation, the way time seemed to bend around us without noticing. I've realized that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or grand proclamations. Sometimes it's measured in quiet presence, in patience, in understanding the unspoken rhythms between two people. She's changed too, not in obvious ways, but in subtle shifts. A lighter step when she moves through her apartment, a small smile that lingers longer than it used to, an ease in letting someone close. And me? I've learned to observe, to wait, to notice without forcing, to understand that care and attention can mean more than words. We found something that feels sustainable, grounded in honesty rather than passion or need. The slow burn that once scared me became a comfort, a reminder that some connections are earned, not demanded. I've learned to appreciate the space between gestures, the small hesitations that carry weight, and the moments when nothing is said but everything is understood. I think about that first night she invited me in, the soft click inside me that told me something was about to change. I never would have guessed it would evolve into this, a quiet, persistent presence in each other's lives, carrying the weight of our past regrets and the light of our shared understanding. There's still tension sometimes, still the odd silence that makes me wonder what she's thinking, but it's no longer uncomfortable. It's familiar, lived in. It's ours. And when I pass her door now, or see her leaning against the counter with that faint half-smile, I feel a soft, steady warmth in my chest. Not dramatic, not overpowering, but real. If this story made you feel something, if the slow burn, the pauses, the quiet realization struck a chord, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?